Group is happy. It's happy to host this roundtable discussion and to be part of the International Development Week in Canada. The theme for this year is Go for the Goals and is meant to encourage Canadians to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. These roundtables are organized so that just governance groups and colleagues have an opportunity to learn and share with international practitioners. And today, we will deepen our understanding of issues related to the SDG 13, taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Please keep in mind that we will record this session so that it can be uploaded in our YouTube channel. We welcome you to keep your camera on, but your microphone on mute. However, if you have concerns about privacy, please keep your camera off. After the presentations, please raise your hand to pose a question directly to our guests or write a question or comment in the chat function. We will monitor the chat and post questions anonymously. Although we are meeting virtually, Just Governance Group would like to acknowledge that its office is on unceded territory of the Algonquin Indigenous Nation. The territory where Canada is located had complex and culturally specific legal, governance, and justice systems prior to the creation of the country. Today, we will discuss gender and climate change. Just Governance is interested to understand how climate change is affecting women and girls around the world and discuss how gender empowerment is interrelated to climate justice. Now we will present the speakers and the participants.
Thank you, Ana Laura, and for all participants joining. We have people here from various countries, I think mostly from Canada, as it is International Development Week here in the country. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Sheila Shahid. She's currently the Chief Operating Officer for the Disaster Climate Change Support Unit in the Department of Public Health Engineering in Bangladesh. Prior to that, Sheila served at the International Center for Climate Change and Development as Senior Advisor for Climate Change, Disaster Risk Reduction, and Gender. She has over 15 years of experience in areas of action research, capacity building with stakeholders, and policy advocacy regionally and globally. She's on various boards and has won various prizes and awards for her work. She is an environmental lawyer and a global climate advocate, and we'd like to welcome her today and thank her for her collaboration with Just Governance Group. Ana Laura, can you start? We'll share Sheila's slides. It's morning here, Sheila, but thank you. It's your evening in Bangladesh. Please go ahead. You have 10 minutes. Each speaker will have 10 minutes, and we'll ask specific questions in between and then have an open discussion.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really want to congratulate and appreciate for organizing such a timely roundtable discussion on gender impacts of climate change. Really appreciating, and I'm taking this as an opportunity to share my experience with the global audience, especially the participants who are joining here. I like to highlight actually from the perspectives of Bangladesh and the Global South, because I have been working since long on the issues of gender and climate justice. So the first thing, actually, we have the tendency to look at the women and the gender perspectives, women and girls, marginalized groups from the perspectives of a victim. But I think that narrative we need to change, because they are the first frontliner, and they are the invisible force of building climate resilience at the very ground level. And this is not only kind of an aspirations, it's actually an issues of the survival for them, to establish the connections of how climate change is impacting women and come up with the kind of and transformative solutions, because they have been working and they are the real fighter at the very ground level. So but how to build an inclusive climate resilient future for women and girls and all other marginalized groups, because we are talking about gender and climate justice here, but we also need to have a kind of focus and lens on intersectionality approaches, while we're talking about gender and power relations. So before going into the deeper of these subjects, I also like to share some of the good examples and policy level practice that the Bangladesh government and our unit and department at this moment implementing at the country level. So, so today's focus, actually, I like to share especially the lessons from the public health perspectives of gender and climate justice, because we all know that we are going through a very unusual situations and kind of era of COVID and the pandemic. And our department is one of the key ministries, I mean, confronting and providing all kind of support in these crisis situations to the country. I think we all have a different level of experiences and evidences that there that how climate change becomes a reality. And it's given the scenario of the COVID situation, it's a kind of triple burden. There are poverty, there are COVID-19, there are disasters. A disaster means people, there are different kinds of frequent disasters, slow onset disasters, and the climate impacts that every day people are encountering in a country like Bangladesh and even in the global south. And there are different kinds of impacts that actually women, they have been facing. So there are decreasing productivity and increasing health risk, a rising insecurity of employment, life, property, and investment status. And while given focus in the context of Bangladesh, we know that women and girls, especially our department, is responsible to provide water and sanitation services at the rural and city level. So the most of the time, the burden of collection of waters that actually goes to the women in 90% of households. And even we consider the city level, women are the key water managers at the rural context. And also, I mean, in terms of at the city level, they're actually the key household manager for integrated water resources management, because they have the knowledge actually where to provide what kinds of water and how to utilize and use and bring kind of water uses efficiency at the household level. And I mean, we also need to think about the youth and the adults and girls, especially COVID-19 and this pandemic pushes even in Bangladesh, 8.7 million youths into poverty in Bangladesh. And there are different other psychosocial impacts also, because schools closure is going on for a long period of time. And lack of adequate workshop facilities affecting girls' attendance, and more than 1 in 4 girls miss school during menstruation. That is another impact that affecting girls' education. And schools closure also created a kind of major disruption for education that exacerbate inequality through reduced interaction, access to school meals and social care, and their future attainment. So we can see that this is a very complex scenario. So given this complex scenario, the key focus of the approach of our specific unit at this moment that has been established since more than 1.5 years to mainstream disaster, climate resilience and emergency response approaches with a focus of gender and inclusion lens all over the country within the local government, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development and Cooperatives. And our Department of Public Health Engineering is one of the key departments under this ministry. So you can see that our key focus is how we can reduce the risk of disasters at the very community level and build the preparedness for the community at different phases of disasters. We are applying climate change adaptation and mitigation approaches and gender equality and inclusion. And in every program implementation, we try to come up with application of gender marker and through an empowerment approach. For the emergency and humanitarian responses, we are working in the largest refugee context in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, and also in different climate hotspot zone, we have been working. So for these, actually, the sector coordination mechanism and partnership for climate adaptation, that is one of the key aspects, how we can build the connection, especially with the local level people, because local level climate adaptation, that's actually very crucial from our perspectives. And as because we work with the engineering and infrastructure issues, so this is very critical to look at the structural and non-structural perspectives of gendered issues, how this can be, make more inclusive in any kind of infrastructure development and large-scale infrastructure development projects in the country. And one interesting thing is that I'm basically trying to share different kinds of learnings and the approaches rather than focusing on the problems, because I think that more or less we all know about the problems. Women's unequal access to the resources, women's unequal access to the assets, to the property, women's unequal access to the local governance systems, how actually they can assert their rights to the agencies, to the institutions, to raise their voice, how we can build the leadership of the women. So these are all kinds of obstacles and barriers. We all know that more or less women are regularly faced at different tier of their life and livelihood. So how actually we are supporting women to overcome these kind of barriers. So for this, actually, our department has been working also to establish a kind of a regular monitoring and follow-up of disaster response and climate change adaptation related interventions. And we also came up with applications of gender responsive indicators. Those are regularly can be monitored, and not only from the quantitative perspectives, but also from the qualitative perspectives, how actually the qualitative changes are happening in the life and livelihoods of women. So these are very crucial for us to have a kind of regular evaluation of the whole process of implementing any kinds of projects. And we also trying to adopt a kind of risk-informed guidelines for resilient water services, equally for the water and sanitation services and any kind of humanitarian and emergency response. And as a whole, as I said, that the Bangladesh government is very much committed through our unit to apply the gender equality and inclusion guideline and module. And in every aspect, we also come up with the gender action plans for capacity development and mobilizations to build the community resilience. So here for the capacity development also, we try to identify different target groups, the policymakers, the engineers, the civil society groups, and the local people themselves, so that actually the needs, the demands, and everything that come up from their initiatives for implementing any sort of capacity and leadership development of the women. I'm going to the next slide. This actually I'm not going to discuss. This is a kind of overview of how we are trying to build the synergies within the different outcome areas of our unit. I already shared with you that how we initiate different kinds of mapping, disaster and community risk assessments by including all level of stakeholders at the very community and ground level, including women. I think there have been two questions and two key issues we like to share. Actually, how women are being impacted because of different level of climate change threats. And the other issues where, especially the lessons learned. What are the key issues where actually we need to work on to build the strength and resilience for the women and to build the leadership for the women, because that's very important, different level of capacity development for the women and giving them a voice so that they can access the three key areas of women's empowerment. Three key areas means actually at the individual level, at the agency level, and the community and societal level. And we try to apply the kind of empowerment approach by equal emphasis on four key areas of empowerment: the physical, social, political, and economic empowerment of the women. And here I like to focus because we are not only working, as I mentioned, that structural perspective is very critical while working with the women, because we work for rainwater harvesting, we work for different technological perspective for the women, sanitation related technology, different water technology. We are also supporting women to become entrepreneur and providing different level of climate financing for the women. That's also another key areas, how women can access the climate financing and become more creating access for women in the market value chain, especially on water and sanitation areas. Recently, we are also trying to create a different pool fund and credit support system for the women so that they can actually borrow the money and invest for their wash-related entrepreneurship related businesses. So by this way, we have been working with the women, but there are some specific key way out for gender responsive climate adaptation that I particularly like to focus. I have already discussed about the capacity building approaches. So this is a kind of understanding the gender roles, particular vulnerable groups, and targeting the hard to reach areas where actually we can provide different customized capacity building support to the institutions, to different stakeholders, the government mechanism, and especially the women themselves and different groups and cooperatives that exist in any rural and municipality and city context. And for the capacity building aspects, we also try to apply the reflection approach so that actually they can link the needs of their life and what are the key barriers actually they face in different phases, and at the community level, at the society level, how they can improve their access even to the budget governance and to the local government different systems. So that's we also try to organize this in a mixed method approaches, inviting the men counterpart and also the local government people so that they can together discuss about the problems and issues and come up with solutions. And I also mentioned about the gender sensitive and gender responsive indicators. So both qualitative, quantitative targets and qualitative interpretations of those tools and methods. Also we apply in every phases of our program implementation. And the government's mechanisms that's very important, that an ownership, transparency, and accountability of local water resources, sanitation services, and how we can ensure a meaningful and effective participation of women. And another very key areas that most of the time we have the tendency to somehow avoid the gender sensitive or gender responsive technology. That's very important, like where actually we are going to establish the water points, the designing of toilet, access to the new technology and innovation, because likewise climate change technology is also not gender neutral, and that's a very critical for the women, for the pregnant women, for the older age women, even in disaster and emergency response scenario. To access the early warning mechanism and different agricultural technology, water technology. So for this, I think this is very important that we always focus on this technical and technological perspectives for the women. and gender budgeting, because that is another, without proper incentives, without proper investment, whatever the policy mechanisms and policy aspirations we have, actually that is not meaningful until or unless we are able to provide and invest adequate budget to implement all these kind of targets and the commitment that we usually try to build transformative changes. So before finishing, given this COVID situation, I like to focus the key lessons learned, how our government and our unit actually strengthening the resilience. Those are mainly that our ministry has adopted the strategy for COVID response, supplemented by the intervention areas for risk communications, infection prevention and control of the national preparedness and response plan for COVID-19. And this has been implementing through an inclusive gender mainstreaming approach. So for any kind of interventions, our key first focus is designing, building and maintaining water and sanitation system, which includes simple modifications to withstand the risk of disasters, any hazards, and ensure safety of the interventions. Particularly, we like to focus on women and girls' needs and the disabled people needs. And then carrying out community and DRR and climate risk assessments, and where we particularly ensure the participations of women and all other vulnerable groups to assess and to have the ability to provide essential services in the event of any disaster, and applying risk proofing lens for any kind of investment, and engaging and consulting the community in planning the water and sanitation services to identify culturally and socially acceptable interventions, which are particularly effective, long-lasting and sustainable through applications of gender marker and empowerment approach, as I mentioned before. And finally, partnership with other organizations, because that's very critical. Without having proper partnership, definitely we cannot achieve anything. So that's overall from my perspectives, and we also equally encourage development partners to invest on more climate financing for the women, especially to avoid any potential loss and damages in future, and build the infrastructure resilience where all the stakeholders, regardless of any kind of bias, the women economic empowerment can be promoted. We know there are numerous challenges exist, and we need to continue working on mitigating those challenges, I think. So I'm again very thankful and honored for inviting me in this important event, and glad to see the progress that has been happening also in the Global South. Definitely, we envision a resilient communities with the participation of all stakeholders, particularly aspire to see women leadership equally with the male counterparts. So I'm finishing here, and any kind of questions about our program implementation approaches and what we are doing at this moment, most welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shaila. We will have a discussion after the next speaker, but if now participants want to pose questions for Shaila and her presentation, please go ahead. You can raise your hand, or you can put them on the chat and we will track them. So we will give a couple of minutes for people if they want to ask something specifically to Shaila.
Hi, Ana. This is Miguel Lopez.
Hi, Miguel.
Hi, Shaila. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very quick question. I'd like to know a little bit more about the local mechanisms that are in place within the communities, so as to ensure that gender-responsive local actions are a reality in your country rather than wishful thinking, because I know that Bangladesh is huge and you are working at the national level. So how does the government ensure that this is the case? That will be one of the questions. And the other question would be, what is the major challenge to ensure the participation of women in planning for climate change and disaster risk reduction? And how is your institution coping with it? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. There are different local government mechanism exist, and for any we have a water management group, we call it WMG, and for water and sanitation also at the very local tier we have different group, and we have government provisions that at least 30% women's participation needs to be ensured for any kind of group. And the approaches from the government side and also from the civil society side, we are trying to apply that, not only ensuring the 30% participation of the women, but if we are trying to have a kind of more than 50% participation of women. But the main thing for the leadership development, we are trying to encourage women, and most of the time actually we are trying to promote them, that for the key executive committee of any water management group and water management associations, there is also as per the government guidelines. So we try to have, there are different executive committee members, and there are treasurer, there are chairman, chairperson, key focal person. So we always try to have women's representation in those kind of group. And recently, I was very closely involved with one of the study that we conducted in the north south areas of Bangladesh, where we actually surveyed more than 1,000 water management group. So from the study perspective, we found that women's participation in the water management group helped them to come up with more political participation in the local government agencies. Because when women start, participating in those kind of water management group, they actually somehow that increase and strengthen their mobility from the community, that also support them acceptance in the community, because they then start talking and raising their voices on different aspects and problems within the community, and especially to establishing their rights within water and sanitation related support and services, and whatever water resources available in that given context. So that is also helping them to increase and more strengthen access to the local government and different support that are and facilities that are available within the local government, and they come to know different facilities those are available from the local government. Usually government also try to, within a programmatic approach and project approach, try to provide different information and knowledge and training and support for the women. So these kind of initiatives are at this moment going on. But in terms of coming to the point of challenges, it is also we saw that convincing the other family members at the community level, especially their husband, their male counterpart, that is one of the key challenges for them, and what kind of benefits actually they are going to have by participation of these kind of groups. That another issue. And another challenges is that local governance structure is not always woman friendly. Even at the very higher level, at the national level, being a woman, we always feel that this is a kind of male dominated structure and institutions. So women's participation and leadership is always very low. So the basic thing we try to provide, this kind of knowledge and practice level to the women, so that they can practice this. Another issue that we have a kind of misconception, because I'm coming from the civil society, since long I have worked with the civil society, because when we talk about the 30% participation of the women, there is a kind of manipulations of data and manipulation of perception and conception that works, because ensuring 30% quantitatively doesn't mean that empowerment is happening. The meaningful participation and active participation of women, we can ensure that. So we also try to focus on what level of women's participations we are ensuring, whether they are active, whether they are raising the questions, whether they are proactively applying their rights. So these kind of things actually we always try to document on the qualitative perspective, because that qualitative changes is very important. So this kind of misconception always happens. And for the women leadership development, there is always a challenge, because nobody actually wants to leave their space, even men. So for this also, we try to have a quota system for the women. in different part, and trying to build a kind of bottom-up approaches. But there are kind of systems from the national level to the local level from the government side. So by this way, actually, we are trying to overcome all these issues. But access to the finance, especially, for example, technological perspectives, access to the finance for starting a new business. For this also very challenging for the women to access to climate financing or any kind of financing at the local government level. So these are the key challenges, and we are working for this. Thank you so much.
Shaila, sorry, I think it's the perfect moment. We have another question in the chat, and it's if you can speak of the role of women's organizations in leading the response at the local level. So I think you already mentioned something, but if you want to add more about it.
Yes. There are different civil society and women organizations exist in the country. We also have separate ministry. Let me also make it clear, because I belong to the Ministry of Local Government, Rural Development and Cooperatives. Our key nodal agency for climate response, that is Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. We have separate system. And when it comes to building the interconnection, also with the disaster risk reduction, we also have a ministry, separate Ministry of Disaster Management. And when it comes to the women's issues, we also have Ministry of Women and Children Affairs. So you can see that there are different ministries, separate ministries with their own jurisdiction and responsibility. So a ministerial coordination is very much critical to have a proper response to the impacts of climate change to the women and girls. And for the women's organizations also, I mean, we work with different level of women's organizations, and we have Ministry of Women, Department of Women Affairs. They also work with women's organizations and try to build the capacity. So in our country, different credit support, different kind of loan and capacity building support. So different mechanisms actually available. We also have SME foundation in the country. So where at this moment there are various level of support and funding mechanism at this moment exists to build the capacity of the women's organizations. And at the local level also, we try to support women to come up with and build the women-led cooperatives. And also, as I mentioned, that for the water management group, we also try to promote women leadership in those water management groups. So changes are happening. I should not say that it's very robust, but transformative changes are happening. We also try to organize a mock and model parliament at the very local level, where we invite women to become members of those model parliaments so that they can start talking and raising their voice about any issues and their local level problems. So by this way, we are supporting to build up the agencies for the women that can work for women and build up the capacity of the local level women's organizations.
Thank you so much, Shaila. As I mentioned before, we will have another open discussion after our next speaker presentation. So please, Kimberly.
Thank you, Ana Laura. I wanted to introduce Adenike Oladosu. She's our second speaker. She's a youth activist from Nigeria. She uses the name The Ecofeminist, and you can find her online and on YouTube to see about her interesting work. A large part of her work focuses on the humanitarian crisis in the Lake Chad region in Africa. It's the freshwater body that has supported the livelihoods of around 30 million people across 4 countries, and climate change has had a serious effect on its water levels. And the UN has called that one of the most unique, complex, and severe humanitarian crises in the world. Adenike has been named by the BBC as a key African activist and spoke at COP25. So we would like to welcome her today. She also has a brief presentation, and then we'll have another discussion. first specific questions for Adenike and then a more general discussion among the participants. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I really love when there's always a transfer of knowledge, a sharing of knowledge between people. You know, everyone wants to know what's how we can save the environment, how women can participate, because women bears the burden of the climate change crisis. And so I believe that if you don't know that the problem exists, you can't solve it. So because I know that the problem exists, and then I'm trying to find solution on how the different ways at which we can use to solve the defined issue of our time. And just to note that there are no one way we can use, we can use different means in solving this crisis. But most importantly, let's look at how the climate change crisis affects women and girls, the solution, their resilience, and the rest. As we now know that all issues are now gendered. When it comes to transport, agriculture, not only just about the environment. The gender issue is a cross-cutting issue right now that's cut across every aspect. And so looking at the case of the study of the Lake Chad region on women and girls in conflict zone, just to quickly tell you what Lake Chad looks like, for some of us that we are just hearing it for the first time, or maybe some of us have heard about the Lake Chad. You know, the Lake Chad is a lake that have once supported millions of livelihoods, and it is bordered by Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and even Central African countries. And so they depend on this lake for different things. But now, since 1960s, the lake has shrunk by 90%. And so since it has shrunk, definitely displacement becomes inevitable. And once displacement sets in, women become disempowered because their livelihood option, of which they depend on natural resources like the lake for fishing, for farming and the rest, it disempowers them because they have fragile livelihoods and their rights to land, they don't really have all the rights that they need to own a land. And so it makes them more prone towards displacement of any kind in the Lake Chad region. And one of my focus is that women and girls in the conflict zone. The Lake Chad region, due to compiling environmental issues over time, it is now a conflict zone, not just conflict, but armed conflict, where we are seeing the rise of inrestitutionists like the Boko Haram, the ASAIP, and the rest kind of armed group that are coming up, trying to challenge women and girls' rights. And one of those things that happened in the region, one of the several crises, is kidnapping. We saw it with the adoption of 276 schoolgirls. That was in 2014. That led to an international outcry of bring back our girls. And that was what made me to think about it, as at then I was in my undergraduate studies, agricultural economics. And then I saw that there's a need for us to create awareness about this link between gender inequality and climate change crisis. So I began to research about it, and I found out that there is this shrinking lake that makes it possible for this harm group to strive. What I mean strive, because people are losing their livelihoods, and this armed group of people, the Boko Haram, they are using this as a basis for them to get more people to their camp. And so I started campaigning about it, and I call myself an eco-feminist. And I think everyone should be an eco-feminist. It is not a threat to the male folks. It is not a threat to anything. It's just a way of us trying to protect the right of women and girls. And also, thereafter I wrote for a journal. If you could see the front page of the journal, in number 60, you could get the book Perspective from Nigeria, Advancing the Ecofeminist Theory in Agriculture. So one of those things I liked it in it is how women's land rights as a threat, as a solution multiplier and a threat minimizer. Because during the COVID-19, when there was no access to all of these resources, like going out, everyone is just staying at home. So women could find a way of trying to cope with the situation through using their gardens to grow crops and to also feed their family. They were trying to exploit different needs, despite they don't have the rights to own a land. And also, I also highlighted the fact that women's right to land in tackling climate change, food security, hunger, poverty, and the rest. When women have rights to own a land, which is what we are currently trying to fight for, it could help to achieve sustainable development goals. And most of the sustainable development goals is tackling climate change, which is SDG 13, food insecurity, education, and the rest, because we have seen over time that child brides increase a lot. That is because they only have one source of income from the husband of the house, while the women just stayed backstage try to do their traditional activities. But when women have a right to own a land, it could empower the whole community, the family, as a whole, the nation, so that women could also provide solutions. They have the indigenous knowledge, they have the innovativeness. All they need is giving them access to own a land. And to a certain extent, from where I am from in Nigeria, when you own a land as a fixed asset, it could increase your chances of you able to get loan or apply for loan and get the loan to resources that you need, like fertilizer, seeds, and the rest. And so during my presentation in London School of Art and Science, I also, the part of the topic is, what does climate justice means for women? And to me, it's climate justice for women and girls would mean creating a safe place for us to exercise our rights. If that is what is happening in our world today, women doesn't have a safe place for their rights to be exercised. They don't have the right to own a land due to social, cultural, environmental reasons. The increase in child bride, just like in the Sahel, where I am from, the region I am from, we have over 20 million child brides. And this goes hand in hand with the environmental instability, that when there is much drought and flood, people tend to give their child out in marriage, as a survival strategy in order for them to get the bride price, like a token or money to settle the family needs. So this has been ongoing year in and year out. And I believe that today's girls, they are tomorrow's women, so we have to start from now to see how we can empower them, then so that tomorrow when they become women, they could find a safer place. And also, just before this next slide, that shows our activities that we have been carrying out in one of those local communities. It was supported by the United Nations Development Program, Nigeria, where they gave us funds. And part of the fund, we used it to give women access to organic fertilizer so that they could have a means of resources to help to increase productivity in their land. And that is the execution process. Because one of those things that affect women's productivity is when they don't have access to resources and when they don't have rights to own a land. So it is very important. And once we could be getting funded, we could do beyond our means to see how we can also invest in funds that will help women to have a secure land for them to be able to contribute. Because from where I am from in Sub-Saharan Africa, women produce 60 to 80% of the food production. So you could imagine if women now have all the rights to own a land, they could be able to grow long-term crops, that could bring in indigenous knowledge, different innovativeness for them to be able to foster food security, zero hunger, no poverty, even able to tackle the climate change crisis. One unique thing about women is that either they're educated or not, they still have that knowledge it takes for them to be able to educate or bring solution on the table for their community if they are given the chance to do that. And yeah, there's a school of thought that today's girls are tomorrow women, and that have to do with how well we are able to manage the situation today. Once child brides keep increasing, it will erode that part of womanhood. It wouldn't make them to have the rights that they think. It will not help them to have the right to education, to sexual reproductive rights, to health, and to other things that could empower them. And also women resilience in climate action. And we have started our activism, like a 30 days of activism. And one of these things that we are trying to showcase in this 30 days of activism, which started on the 8th of February this month and runs through to the 8th of March next month, 2022, is for us to be able to showcase different women in the world that are trying to create a safer place for everyone, to be able to tell what is the state of women's rights. Why are women being threatened or murdered or killed in the process of them trying to defend their environment and the rest? So in this 30 days of activism, we are trying to exploit different means at which women are trying to create a sustainable world, which have started. You could check through our YouTube channel. We have the first episode is up with Professor Chantel and Professor Brown Michael. And so this is the name of our YouTube channel, the Ecofeminist channel. So you could check there for different videos that we've uploaded so far. And then our website is where you will see different articles that we have written about gender-related issue, engendering the Lake Chad restoration, and different articles you could read and get to understand what we are talking about. There are tons of articles for you to read in our website to understand more of our activities and all. So the next slide talks about the question I have for you people. What does women's rights means to you? I know different people have different definition of women's rights, So my own definition, I've said it earlier, trying to create a safe place for women and girls' rights to be, for them to exercise their rights. And then the second one, what will it take to end child marriage? If we don't tackle child marriage now, how will they be able to experience motherhood? Like, they are too young at an illegal age just because they are using them as a coping strategy, then it affects their future, because definitely we are seeing this in the Sahel, the Lake Chad region, about 20 million child brides. So, and I think I wrote an article in my website that I've just shared to you, where I mentioned the fact that women's land rights could be one of those solutions that we could use to end child marriage, because some people see child marriage as a protection of the child or as a financial solution for the family. But I believe that when women have rights to own a land, it could increase their saving power, their bargaining power. It could help them to save their saving rate, so that they could also become equal contributors of finance in the family. It could also bring their innovativeness and productivity in different aspects of our economy if we give them the chance to exercise their rights. And thirdly, what will it take to get a balanced society? It could take a lot of things for us to get a balanced society, good governance, having climate, gender-sensitive approaches in all we do, try not to leave women and girls behind, and a whole lot of things. So I'm happy to hear from you, your own side of the answers to the questions. And if you have questions for me, very happy to take all of those. Thank you so much.
Adenike, I wanted to ask you if you could link, if you ended by focusing on child marriage, and I wonder if you can relate that back to climate change and disaster risk reduction for us.
Okay, very well. The child marriage I'll be talking about, I made instances about the Sahel region, whereby there are more than 20 million child brides. And this goes in handy with the environmental degradation that is happening. In Sahel alone, there are 80% of the environment of the farmland has been degraded. And in Africa, we have this culture that we depend on agriculture for everything. And so this alarming increase in child brides happens especially in the rural area, where these people or the family members are or depends on agriculture for their livelihoods, for employment, and the rest. And so when there is deep reduction in productivity, or when there is drought, or when flood have taken over their landscape, then they tend to use the female child to get married at an illegal age, so that they could use such money they get to stabilize the family. So women and girls has become a survival strategy in such situation as a coping mechanism for the family. As they are using it as a disaster reduction, but we could use the rights of women's land to help increase girls' child education, to help reduce disaster, in the sense that once women have this right to own a land, they could increase productivity, they could grow long-term crops such as trees that could serve as a windbreaker. You know, they have this tendency of trying to do things that they think they could use to preserve the environment, because they are the true custodians of the environment. I wrote it in one of the articles, the next, I think Next Blue, where I mentioned how we can use ecofeminism in agriculture. And I mentioned the whole aspect of what it takes for us to be able to do that. And so it's a way that when we have reduced child rise, definitely it could help to reduce any disaster that could happen, because those girls could also become change makers in their society, in their community, helping to provide solutions, just as I am trying to provide solutions for my community. They could also become one of those women, you know, that could do that in the future or in the present. And that is why I was so disheartening when I saw that about 276 schoolgirls were adopted from their school in
Okay, thank you.
2014 and 2018.
That helps bring it all together. And I think Anna Laura wants to ask if there's any specific questions for you. I just wanted to pull your presentation together there at the end and open up so we can look at the intersection of women's rights, girls' rights, climate change, disaster reduction, and all of these issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really interesting. And now if participants have specific questions for Adenike, please raise your hand or post them on the chat. And then after that, we can start discussing about the two presentations and how they interlink. I don't see anyone raising their hand, so
I don't see any specific questions, so I think what maybe both Adendike and Shayla can turn their, well, Adendike has her camera on. Shayla can turn her camera on as well. I think for me it was interesting for both of the presentations that, you know, we started this by wanting to look at the Sustainable Development Goal 13 and the gender aspects of progress towards that goal. But of course, it's all interrelated to a lot of other development issues. Of course, SDG 5 around gender equality. But I think it would be really helpful to explore a bit more about the interrelated rights of not only women and girls, but other, you know, whether it's civil political rights around these issues, but of course, mostly the economic, social, and cultural rights that Adendike highlighted in her presentation, and how women and girls' engagement and rights are sort of a site of I guess climate action and climate justice. And I wonder if either of you had any comments on that intersection, and maybe it will spur some other questions from our participants here. Did you want to say something, Shayla?
Yeah, I was also, thank you for raising such a very valid and questions. Intersections of rights that you mentioned about economic, social, cultural, and political rights, those are very important. I was also listening Adendike, because we can see different contexts. I mean, kind of little bit opposite, although the root causes are kind of same, because the global south, the geographical and the vulnerability that are a little bit different than the context that Adendike is working at this moment. But as I mentioned, the marginalizations, the deprivations, and exploitations in terms of women, the problems and the barriers they face, these are kind of same, all these structural problems. I mean, at a very local level, I mean, for the women, it's actually all together, all these kind of problems and barriers and challenges. So how we can build the synergies and comprehensively work on these issues together, that's very important. So I mean, the education is very important, because the child marriage issues also came. And from the context of Bangladesh, we have also seen in the climate, especially in the coastal zone, in the climate vulnerable locations, the rate of child marriage is higher. Especially women and girls, they carry the burden of collection of waters from long distances. And so the education, that is very important, providing them educated skills, letting them know about the different physical aspects, because it's also very important that women and the adults and girls, they get to know about their body and the physical needs, and the way they will visualize themselves in the community at the family level. Because when we talk about the sanitation, water and sanitation is also access to the dignity, privacy. We also, I mean, see there are different kinds of incidents happening, the menstrual hygiene management at the schools. And in a climate vulnerable locations, there is salinity in the coastal zone. And there are a scarcity of water, adequate water. So even in the schools, if we can't provide adequate support for water, running water for the girls, so that creates another level of problems. So for all this together, and women's access to the land rights, and women's access to the local government, the agencies, these are equally critical. So when we talk about empowerment, it's not that only in one area is women building their capacity, they are becoming empowered. So all these areas actually needs to work together. If they aren't, they cannot take decisions where actually they're going to spend their money. So they are not properly empowered. So physical, political, economic, all this empowerment and how society accepting them, recognizing them as a full woman, I mean, as a human being. So these issues are very important. So social mobilization is very critical. Working at the very ground level, participations of the man counterpart, and working with the agencies, although also with the religious institutions, those are very important. So that we can start working, changing the mindset of the community level people and giving them the tools and different drivers and mechanisms so that actually they can start earning and they can start contributing meaningfully and visibly at the family and community level. So these all issues need to work together. So these are the interfaces we need to work, I mean, for the disaster risk reduction, for climate change adaptation, and for women's empowerment, and within the ministries at the local government, because it's for, I mean, whatever support going to the women, it should not go in a linear way. It should go actually with a kind of harmonious package, or with the kind of thing that fully become, I mean, they can be empowered. They have the proper knowledge and everything, access to everything. So by this way, there are different organizations. The government is also trying to work on these, making this happen. But it's very important that we provide that level of mass awareness to the women and start investing more on them. Thank you.
There's a question. Thank you, Sheila. There's a question for Adenike about young women's engagement in climate change or coping with climate change, and what do they bring to the table? What new, I guess, new approaches do they bring to the table? And how is that, I guess, affecting and changing at the higher level, the youth activism?
Okay, thank you so much. From what I have said, how are you seeing young, particularly women, getting involved in coping with climate change, and what do you think they are bringing to the table? Okay, let's start with that one. What do you think they are bringing to the table which was not there before? So one of those things that wasn't there before, just before I could start my activism, is the fact that when we are going for let me say project exhibition or execution, I usually call for, okay, I usually go meet with the community elders to bring their representative. But then when they are coming for to represent them in the event, which takes place in the community, I usually see that they are all male dominated. And then I will ask, where are the females? Where are they? You know, so that they could also benefit from the knowledge we want to share from them. It shouldn't be male dominated. I think that was what I was able to change. That was what I was able to change among the people's mindsets, that this is not just a male dominated event or knowledge sharing, but this is something that is both for male and female to benefit in it. So I try to redefine that part, that it shouldn't just be that women should just be responsible just for traditional activities like in the kitchen, but they should also be involved in not just participation, but during the action process. And that was why during when we have the fund, we try to see how we can include it or make it to be gender sensitive enough that we are not just distributing it for just or giving it to the community elders, because if we are going to give it to the community elders, they might not be able to distribute it to the women. Might just be only the male that could benefit from it. So we're able to carry out that project in such a way that it was female dominated. From the picture you saw me, I took with them at the field, it was male dominated. While when I was there, we were taking the practical aspect and we could distribute it there for the female farmers. And I think that is one of the things that we are bringing to the table, us being there practically, trying to illustrate this solution in a practical manner that it could benefit both sexes, not just one part of it, you know. So that's another climate or gender sensitive approach that we are trying to bring on the table. And so how is this changing the climate justice landscape? Very well. Recently, I started advocating for women's land rights because I studied agricultural economics, and I saw that in allocation of loan, it has to do with fixed assets, of which women sometimes or most times, especially those that are not that educated, doesn't have, is the land, you know. So when they have this land, they could be able to approach any loan scheme to get these benefits, for them to be able to have the necessary resources that they need, such as fertilizer, seed, and the rest, for them to be able to increase productivity, tackle the climate change crisis, and the rest. So it's another way at which we are using to define, you know, the climate justice, that if we don't give women access to land, then there is no way we can tackle climate change crisis. There is no way we could also improve girls' child education, because we are saying that there's a need for girls' child education, but at the same time, there's an increase in child brides. And one of those problem we have been able to identify is the issue of land rights. You know, women sometimes they have to spend 20 hours or more to source for these resources that are scarce. But then they have the initiative for them to be able to sustainably make use of maybe their land or water in such a way that it could be enough for the community, because they are the custodian of the environment. They have a close relationship with their environment. Hence, if we want to stop child marriage, then we have to invest in women's land rights. And through that means it could help to better a girl child education, tackle the defining issue of hard time and the rest. And also, most importantly, is for us to think beyond environment, that this issue is not just all about environment issue. It is now cultural issue. We not being able to have it in land, in transportation, in power, because women have to trek distance sometimes to get firewood, which are unsustainable, so that they could help to stabilize their family. But once there is energy options, such as renewable sources of energy, it could help them to reduce that time constraint they uses to go get water, go get firewood and the rest, and then channel those restricted time or those times that they could use to get all of those things for something economic or productive, or to learn more skills, or to be empowered in different ways. So those are the ways at which we have been exploring as a young women, trying to see how we can foster climate action. And I guess other people too have different ways at which they exploit these means.
Thank you, Adenike. I wanted to ask one final question, and then we're going to wrap up. Because obviously there's a lot happening nationally in a lot of countries. It seems like both in Nigeria and Bangladesh, there's very sort of rights-based, gender-sensitive empowerment and inclusive focus, which I think is positive news. But I wanted to ask is if we think broader, excuse me, and maybe Miguel's question was going to that a broader international level. I would like to ask if international agencies that you've had contact with, and perhaps outside, not only in your countries, but outside, are actually attentive and supportive of sort of a multi-dimensional approach and to financing for grassroots women's organizations, to make sure that our progress around climate justice is not sort of top down, but bottom up. And I wonder if you could have just final comments on that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think one of these our 30 days of activism in the discussion we had is climate finance gender sensitive, because it all has to start with that issue, because gender issue is cross-cutting. So yeah. So gender issue is cross-cutting, and that was what propelled me to ask about that, because though there are finances, but then it is not up to what it should look like in trying to solve all of these issues. And to a certain extent, I think there is also cultural, social factors that affect these finances, So when we are trying to finance, let me say, for example, we are trying to give women's loan. How about the land that they need for them to be able to carry out these activities in order for them to be able to become productive and the rest? So it all has to go handy with each other, because recently, though, I got involved in a project that has to do with selecting 8 female from different areas in the global south to see how they can support them. We are having different international organizations trying to champion that cause, and just recently getting an invitation from the United Nations Women from Germany too. All people trying to exploit those options. And I think it's very important, but they are all also linked to each other, that the finance that we need is not as much as it should be in tackling this crisis. And if there is also a problem that when women are given this loan, where are the assets or the land that they could use, to transform productivity, to tackle climate change and the rest. So they are all connected. The grassroots could be culturally linked, because where I am from, to a certain extent, women doesn't have rights to own a land. So it's just take you to have like it's more like a family difference, when a particular family believes in their female child, and now it now differs from what the cultural norms look like. Because I went for a grassroots activities, and I noticed that such norms still exist, where the women doesn't have a right to own a land, except it's linked to their husband name. Then they could inherit it at a certain time. They could also get that inheritance from them, once the husbands died or something. So those are the kind of issues that we are faced with when it comes to financing.
And so the international community needs to focus a lot on those structural issues, I guess.
Of course.
Right.
Restructuring is very important. We have to take notice about the social, the cultural tradition in such communities in order for the project to work well.
Okay. I want to pass now to Shayla, if you have any comments around the international community support or international financing on gender and climate justice.
Yeah, thank you. I think international community has been supporting for women's and gender and climate justice since long. I have been an active member of the Women and Gender Constituency within the UNFCCC mechanism. and still I'm very closely involved with them. So they have different mechanisms of building women leadership. They have a kind of mechanism also to promote women leadership within the government delegations. They regularly track the mechanisms, how women leadership are being developed within the climate negotiations. And I have been participating also within the UNFCCC and COP mechanism since long. And when it comes to the climate financing, not only within the UNFCCC mechanism, gender is one of the key areas for implementation of the Paris Agreement and while developing the Paris Rule Book. But in terms of climate financing, there are different levels of climate financing available. I worked also as a gender monitor within the Green Climate Fund mechanism at the regional level. And there are groups, those actually regularly review different projects that usually been submitted for the Green Climate Fund at the country level. What we used to do, identifying and reviewing the gender aspects where actually that needs to be strengthened, what are the loopholes and challenges. So from the international community, there is a very structured mechanisms and mandatory provisions available in all kinds of climate related funds. Not only the Green Climate Funds, but there is also the Climate Investment Fund, there are adaptation funds. So all these kind of different level of funds, there are specific gender guidelines that needs to be followed while submitting any kind of proposal. And there are detailed provisions for gender assessment. So without having a detailed gender assessment, any kinds of funds and funding mechanism that cannot be sought even at the country level. So given this, I like to share another issue about the UNFCCC mechanism, because in our country, we also reviewed as per the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, there is another provision of climate change gender action plan that we call CCGAP. So the CCGAP usually been prepared considering each and every sectors, key sectors in the country, and also considering the role of each and every ministry, how they are putting different investment and revenue budget or financial investment for building the capacity of women and climate change. In our country, we have more than 4 or 5 years, actually, we have started this to track gender and climate change budgeting within the revenue budget system. So these kind of provisions, that is a kind of the country proactively taking initiatives, but also there are international pressure. And I actually don't like to mention any specific name of any specific organizations, but I have closely worked with IDRC, Canadian government, the UK government, and there are different governments and international agencies. Those have actually the provisions of influencing and integrating the gender aspects, a strong gender marker in any policy interventions but to ensure gender and climate justice. But other than this is very I mean, a positive scenario that women are being more conscious about their rights, because I say that that's not only their aspirations, that's not only that the international community giving to them, that's actually the basic of their survival. And another issue I like to mention here, because recently we conducted one of the study in Bangladesh, and we found that the investment of the local people for their survival, for the climate coping mechanisms and climate change adaptation, that is more than 10 times higher than the investment that come through the international community. So you can imagine, so that's the first thing, the first response, the emergency and first disaster or climate response that people are making, the women are making, because they actually the first person who are going outside to collect water, who are trying to protect the family assets, who actually going to the shelter home, trying to protect the family, trying to feed them, trying to provide nutrition, through agricultural support and water related issues, all these things they have to deal. So they know better. So that's actually, we are always trying to promote the local level adaptation measures, because they know better. all these, indigenous wisdoms and the indigenous practices. There are modern facilities available, but we need to kind of having a blending of those together so that that can actually improve the quality and the interventions of the mechanism or whatever support or whatever benefits actually they want to achieve. So this way, I think a kind of partnership within the international community and what are the provisions and women's group, especially I'm part of Women and Gender Constituency, the women's major group within the SDG mechanisms. So those are the women actually coming from the civil society and grassroots level. So there are bottom-up approaches. We are raising our voice and we are trying to build the connection so that the feedback can be taken to the ground level. And also the best practice and an example can be showcased and explored and further expanded at the international level. So by this way, I think the changes are happening and I'm very hopeful that women are moving, women are becoming the change makers and things are being changed. So these are the positive notion. We need to celebrate women's leadership and all these things together.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Well, both of you are leaders in this. So, I wanted to thank you very much for joining us today. For me, it's been fascinating to look at the intersection of different rights and link to both the climate change impacts and the solutions and young women, girls, the effect of climate change on them, the issue of child marriage, which, sitting in Canada immediately, I wouldn't think of child marriage being affected to climate change. So the link between all of these issues, rights issues, are very important. And obviously we need to work from the ground up and not the other way around in every country and every community. I wanted to thank you so much for your insights and wish you best of luck in your efforts. And to all who were online with us today, thank you for your participation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you so much to the Just Governance Group, to Anna, and all the participants and audience. Yeah,
thank you so much. We'll be putting this our
you.
YouTube video up on our site.
Okay, thank you so much.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Continue.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.